We're going to go through some of our Maxi Nutrio case studies. As Sabrina mentioned, my name is Dr. Jessalyn Waukee of Production Poultry Veterinary Services. I'm a private practitioner that specializes in commercial poultry in Ontario, Canada. And today what we're going to do is go through some of our uses and cases with Maxi Nutrio products in Canadian poultry. So to start off with, as a private practice, we focus and prioritize values around stewardship, communication, excellence, client service, and integrity. And why I draw attention to these is these values guide our decisions in medicine and partnership as we navigate the challenges in optimizing bird health and well-being, food safety, and profitability. So the Canadian poultry industry operates under a very strict and regulated supply management system. It's a countrywide operating system that has some provincial variations, but all the major poultry production groups, chickens, eggs, turkeys, they all operate under this system. And it allows for controlled supply and demand and setting a specific price to be able to facilitate the industry and proper growth of all of our birds and products. But there are independent sectors and stakeholders, so it's not integrated. And why I draw attention to this is on a global scale, there might be variations, but as we work through our case studies, you'll see where Maxi Nutrio and the diseases have a common link. So again, in Canada, our poultry industry is highly regulated around food safety, animal care and welfare, veterinary medicine, and we're all obligated to operate within these rules and regulations. Of note, the Canadian health system has drawn attention for antimicrobial stewardship as a top priority, and in particular in Canadian poultry production. In 2018, Health Canada mandated a significant change in the way that we use antibiotics in livestock. These regulations are based on the categorization of the different antimicrobials, both on-label and off-label use. So what this resulted in was we have to be responsible and targeted in our use of antibiotics. And there's a high level of veterinary accountability around any and all uses of these antibiotics. Of note, and this is an example of information that's shared by Canadian poultry with the general public. And the key message is actually highlighted at the bottom. Simply by using antibiotics creates resistance. And so of course there's this human drive around antimicrobial stewardship and antimicrobial resistance. And Canadian poultry has been at the forefront of wanting to be stewards in this area. And therefore, as a private practitioner, we followed suit. This means that we're going to have very targeted approaches and high regulation around the way antibiotics are used. It also has us as veterinarians looking for other tools to be in our toolbox to support these birds and their production. What has also resulted is that specific types of poultry production groups have arose. So there's going to be controlled antibiotic use, which we'll call conventional. And it's important to share, based on our past slides, that it is actually very highly regulated around our withdrawals and types of antibiotics being used. But then there's more specific groups like reduced and responsible use, so RUA or no antibiotics important to human medicine. There's also the complete removal of antibiotics with raised without antibiotics all the way down to organic. And therefore, when I'm looking for tools to support these different groups, we need to be able to have targeted approaches that can achieve the same production goals for each of these types of birds. Now, when I look back, this is specific data for our practice over our 5-year trends. The key points that I'd like to draw attention to here is that we're experiencing a significant amount of disease challenge across all of our production groups. The major diseases fall into these categories of bacteria, viruses, intestinal challenges, and they pose a significant risk to mortality and inhibiting performance. And if we look back over the last 5 years, our major diseases are merely shuffling for the top ranking positions. And the key take home is that in my personal opinion, disease is not going anywhere. Arguably, the pressure is actually increasing as we're asking more of our birds in terms of performance and reducing the total amount of antimicrobial tools. And as well, in my personal experience, I believe their efficacy at times is decreasing as well. So therefore, we have to look to expanding our strategies and our preventative tools in order to respond to this new landscape and increasing disease pressure. So why do we reach for the Maxi Nutrio in terms of the feed and liquid products? So Maxi Nutrio has become a trusted product in our practice. We use and recommend it every day to our producers and flocks. We do this because it's a multi-pronged approach for bacterial binding, gut health support, immune support, and what we've actually found is increasing our antibiotic sensitivity trends. We use Maxi Nutrio because bacteria is an everyday reality for us, and therefore the birds and their gut health is going to be highly dependent on the winning the battle at that gut health level, and therefore we've also found that if we can influence the bacteria and the gut health, potentially we have the opportunity to influence our overall performance and be in a better position for bird health and immunity when fighting other challenges such as viruses. In 2024, we actually have an increasing trend of using Nutrio. This data reflects back into April, but it's being used in nearly half of our cases as a total. The majority of our cases, as you can see here, are actually bacterial in nature, but we also see concurrent diseases with those cases, including viral challenges and non-specific gut damage, and also lesions that are reflective of specific challenges of the gut, including a runting stunting syndrome and necrotic enteritis. So anything that's damaging that gut, impacting that immune system, or allowing primary or secondary bacteria to create a drag on the bird's health and performance. So on a day-to-day basis, these are the ways in which we actually use Maxi Nutrio. In a preventative sense, we have it worked into our base health programs, and we tend to target that around predictable stresses in terms of our levels and how we use that. For example, vaccination events or coccycycling. We use it in a supportive way, both in our direct and indirect gut health challenges and immune support. We use it as an intervention for bacterial and gut challenges, primary or secondary, and as well, we use it in viral cases. We also use it strategically around combination with antibiotics, either before, during, or after as a synergistic effect, and in terms of supporting gut health. So when we first got introduced to Maxi Nutrio, it had a natural fit to be able to be in base programs and have a lower inclusion level as a support. And what we found was that it actually had, as expected, a strong impact on the gram-negative bacteria, for example, E. coli. And at first, when I was introduced to the product years ago, it made sense to be able to target our approach around early bacterial and late bacterial challenges. So for example, early startups in a broiler where they might be experiencing septicemia or urticulitis driven by colibacillosis, or as well in terms of condemnations at the end of a flock. So there's a natural fit and progression towards general gut health support, towards actually having targeted approaches around specific challenges related to gram-negative bacteria. And because we saw such a dramatic and positive response in terms of being able to prevent or actually impact these bacterial challenges, we then started to use it in targeted ways. In particular, we started with RWA, or raised without antibiotic flocks, around specific bacterial challenges or a flare-up in terms of more of what we would consider a treatment approach. And again, the response was so positive that we were able to translate that into conventional flocks and show that there was an application across different sectors of poultry and different production types in terms of species as well. And we were seeing this positive uptick. And then I came across this opportunity to use it in cases of a viral challenge. And this was very noteworthy and something we'll talk about in our case examples. So what was happening there, the thinking was in these very severe, for example, inclusion body hepatitis challenges, we would also see bacterial lesions, arguably whether that was primary, secondary. Alas, that what was happening was the virus was basically devastating the flock. And the thinking has always been, well, there's nothing you can do. It's a virus. Potentially there's vaccination and preventative approaches in that manner. But now we're into a live outbreak. Is there much we can do? And so I was able to flip that thinking on its head and say, of course, there's something we can do. At the very least, we can take care of the bacteria. And with the opportunity to use higher levels of the liquid and in-feed product, we're able to see a very positive response, more than just what I was expecting in terms of taking care of a portion of what may have been considered a pure bacterial challenge in a given flock, and the virus working its way through. So much so that it got me thinking that perhaps there is actually direct implications for the immune system and how the birds would be able to manage these viral challenges. And so now, the common phrasing in our practice is, if we come up against, say, for example, an inclusion body hepatitis or IBH case, the thinking is there's always something we can do. And it's become actually a standard practice and approach. Of course, we're layering that in with preventative programs, but the conversation has expanded far beyond just a simple base gut health program, bacterial challenges, and now we're looking into a broader scope of viruses. So with that in mind, I'll take you through a couple of our cases that we've experienced over the years. Here's an example of a viral case of inclusion body hepatitis, and this is in a flock raised conventionally, so they do have access to antibiotics, but again, highly regulated. So this is actually a very significant case. I've put this in here to document the types of severities of IVH cases we have seen in recent years. The total mortality of this flock ended up being close to 30%, but the progression of events started with documenting early bacterial challenges. There would have been a lower supportive level of the Maxi Nutrio available and in the feed. And then as we progress into this day 15, and you can see the lesions in our pictures here, we document inclusion body hepatitis and the mortality. And then in 24 hours is starting to rise like crazy. And we're watching the birds unfortunately exhibit signs of the virus in terms of morbidity and mortality. So we respond rapidly with treatment level Maxi Nutrio liquid, supported also with Maxi Nutrio treatment level in the feed. And the key take homes here are that we're actually able to contain the total mortality event to 6 days. And what we're left with is a flock that was able to achieve their target weights and have very low condemns. And interesting enough, despite the devastation of total mortality, the producer was very satisfied with the outcome and was able to maintain a positive outlook for this flock despite the high mortality, simply because of how well the rest of the flock did. We're always going to be left with what if we hadn't taken those steps, and what the flock would have looked like without these supportive measures. But based on our other experiences, I would say this had a very positive impact for this particular flock. Here's another example of a inclusion body hepatitis challenge in a flock that was raised without antibiotics, so no preventative, no treatment level of any antibiotics available. We do start with a supportive rate of Maxi Nutrio in the feed, and that's been a base program that we've seen in this particular program, or the system of broiler chickens that helps them combat all the challenges in the Ontario landscape right now. We document early bacteria. We're able to transition into using the Maxi Nutrio liquid as an ability to top up that supportive level. And then there is a significant IVH challenge that's documented, and we're able to then rise again back from that supportive level to another treatment level with the Maxi Nutrio liquid and finishing on a higher level of that Maxi Nutrio in feed. We see a positive response, and the mortality was actually able to stay under 0.15% per day. And in our experience, that's actually quite low. It's not uncommon to see these cases go as high, even in a considered a lower level of IBH, 0.5% per day. So the producer is very happy with this response and feeling as though it was able to be contained. And therefore, when we start thinking about examples after that of how it influences the producer and their livelihood, not only are they able to have a flock successfully go to market, but then the implications of clean out and such thereafter, theoretically, we're wondering if, that is just a total pressure on the farm, be it bacteria, parasites, and viruses is lower, and allows them to have a faster reset and therefore a more profitable year overall. Here's an example of actually a very complicated case where there are viruses, there are gut health challenges, and bacteria involved. So this is a flock that is a conventionally raised flock, and we document bacteria. We actually have to use an antibiotic in the water, amoxicillin, and then we run into issues with infectious bronchitis or infectious bursal disease, and also coccidiosis. So we have viral challenge different viruses now here, respiratory and immune system wise on the bursal side. And then we have a significant challenge in terms of the gut health. And the key takeaway is, although again, this flock experienced a relatively high level of mortality for Ontario standards, over 12% final. However, they were very happy. Water consumption came back up. Weight gains were starting to come back up. And the real time kind of fighting in the trenches to get this flock to market, the overall condemns were quite pleased. And then the total mortality was dropping rapidly as we were applying that Maxi Nutrio liquid and in-feed approach. So even in a complicated case where there's multiple ways in which this flock is quote unquote under attack, this has become a trusted way to be able to support the birds in and around even antibiotic treatment. This is another example of a complicated case where inclusion body hepatitis as a virus is involved, infectious bronchitis, and bursal disease. We start with early bacterial challenges. That Maxi Nutrio is increased to a treatment level, and we're able to follow up with a supportive level. But then we run into this IBH around that 20-day mark, and we're able to add in back in the treatment level of Maxi Nutrio. This is a longer lived bird, and therefore we have more time, but also more in terms of kilos per bird to protect as we head towards a roaster weight. And so we're able to leave that Maxi Nutrio in the feed. Interesting enough, despite all the disease that we're able to document, this is a great example that overall mortality stayed very low. And I think it has to do with how all the monitoring that we're doing, but then the right decisions at the right time. Weights were slightly low, which I was not surprised to see in considering the severity of the bursal challenge. However, in terms of final profitability and performance, those low condemns and low mortality were able to make for a successful flock. Here's an example of me reaching for Maxi Nutrio in perhaps a maybe indirect scenario where we have severe, significant gut damage. And while this damage is being caused in a race without antibiotics flock by coccidiosis and necrotic enteritis, in particular the culprit necrotic enteritis being driven by Clostridium perfringens, a gram-positive bacteria, I still believe that there's a lot of damage happening at the gut level. Again, have an experience to say, well, we have 4 days left till shipping. Antibiotics are not an option, including the days to market, but also the program type. Let's focus on repairing the gut. Interesting enough, the producer himself calls back to give positive feedback, says mortality drops significantly in the final days. Excellent, condemns, can you help me put together a program where I can use this effectively? In my mind, if we're keeping the good healthy, the good birds healthy, also repairing some of those birds that may have been on the borderline that may have resulted in a condemn, or even just helping some of these birds that are sick try to recover. I think this has been an excellent approach for supporting gut health overall. Here's an example of using Maxi Nutrio products in broiler breeders. This flock was presented to us as at 19 weeks of age. They had already previously been treated with amoxicillin antibiotic, and they were having significant lingering ongoing bacterial lameness, and mortality was actually on the rise. So we were able to actually implement a Maxi Nutrio treatment program, followed by then a step-down program to a base level. Again, producer-driven feedback is a positive response. They wanted to continue on that Maxi Nutrio in feed for the following 3 weeks, but they also approached me on integrating Maxi Nutrio into a base program around the pullets and transitioning into lay. Here's a great example of being able to protect, your investment in terms of a very expensive bird that, often is, I find in Ontario, does get challenged with bacterial lameness. If we can keep that bacteria bound at the gut level and be able to create a healthy and supportive gut environment for that bird, I think we'll be rewarded long term. Here's an example of using Maxi Nutrio in laying hens. We were presented with this case as the increasing mortality in this flock, and upon opening the birds, they actually were quite septic, or they're experiencing bacterial peritonitis. Now, this is an extended lay flock. It's not that common in Ontario. However, these birds were in desperate need of additional support. What we actually ended up noting was the peritonitis, as mentioned, and fatty liver. recommended using the treatment level followed by a Maxi Nutrio in feed. And they were actually able to see a very good response. The description provided the producer was that it took a day or so, and then mortality was actually able to reduce significantly, upwards of 60% within a week. And again, wanted to build a preventative program into their future flocks, be them traditionally raised or being an extended lay, wanted to be able to reach for this product. And I think saw such value in having that Maxi Nutrio liquid on hand. Switching gears towards being able to show how we've used the product in our case examples. And along the way, what we've also discovered is this shifting in antimicrobial sensitivity. So not only are we expanding our ways in which we're using from our guts to our bacterial binding to our total immune system, but we're also picking up on a shifting in terms of what we're seeing for bacterial sensitivity profiles. Here's an example of a conventional flock raised with the preventative use of antibiotics in a strategic manner. However, they still experience disease challenges. So they were presented to us at day 3, and the mortality was climbing. However, we were able to get a swab, and as we can see by the first documentation from the lab above, the results are not overly promising. Just looking down, I've circled red to show the resistance patterns against our major antibiotics available. Therefore, we decided to reach for Maxi Nutrio liquid and followed that by an in-feed option. The producer then was able to follow up with us at day 18, and we're able to repeat our swab. Now, interesting enough, we see a very quote-unquote clean resistance or sensitivity profile here with the green circles around all of those S's for sensitivity in terms of our major antibiotics available. And there were complications, as there is multiple bacteria documented, and therefore we did need to reach for an antibiotic. And we were able to have a very successful response. Despite being a little bit later in terms of our treatment, we documented that cleaning up of the sensitivity profile, and therefore the flock was able to respond effectively. So this got us thinking, is there a pattern here? Are we seeing this in other areas? And so we've started into some of our major antibiotics tracking the trends around sensitivity. So these graphs are all the same, but just to take a few seconds to explain the groups that we have split out here. The top bars are representing flocks that have actually been on a Maxi Nutrio health program. They've seen a preventative, at minimum, preventative level, supportive level of Maxi Nutrio for a minimum of 3 flocks. The middle group of bars, that represents flocks that have experienced Maxi Nutrio within the current flock and minimum 5 days prior to being able to take that swab. And the final set of bars at the very bottom of the sheet of these charts represents flocks that have not been experiencing or exposed to Maxi Nutrio at any point in previous or current flock. So what we're doing is grouping our sensitivity patterns over the years, and we're seeing that a trend, if we just watch the visual colors, an increasing in green, which represents sensitivity, or versus a decreasing or increasing of red, which represents resistance. If we take tetracycline, that's the graph that's on the page right now, and we look at our top graph, what we're documenting is an improving in antibiotic sensitivity in general, period, but also an increasing or widening of that green graph over time. So as the flocks get older and they've been on Maxi Nutrio longer and repeatedly, we're seeing that there's an increasing in antibiotic sensitivity with aging of the flock. We see a positive response in the groups that have at least experienced Maxi Nutrio within their flock. It's not as dramatic as the health programs where they have a continual use, but it's still significantly more sensitive than the last group on the bottom of the page, which shows actually an increase in resistance with age, almost as if that bacteria is kind of taking over the flock. Now, it's important to note that why I put this slide up first is tetracycline is actually an older antibiotic. And in Ontario, Canada, I can speak specifically to fairly overused product, as prior to 2018, this product was available over the counter. and therefore was readily used at the drop of a hat when they decided that the flock was challenged. Why wouldn't we start with this antibiotic? It was cost effective and readily available, could be put in the water. So I've even seen those sensitivity patterns decreasing over time just in general. So to see an older antibiotic be reviving and then actually improving in sensitivity, to me that has quite a bit of significance and is influencing how I'm prescribing this product in and around Maxi Nutrio-based flocks. So we looked at other products, other antibiotics on the market and ones that we use within the practice, and we're seeing the overall similar trends. There's minor variations within these flocks, and we'd like over time to try to tease apart, what is happening and trying to explain these patterns. This is an example of a neotet or neotetracycline. So again, a tetracycline-based product, and we're seeing in those health programs and increasing in sensitivity. There's still an improvement in sensitivity over non-use flocks. However, the strongest is in those Maxi Nutrio-based health programs. Here's an example in amoxicillin, a commonly used antibiotic across our species of chickens and turkeys and breeders and broilers. And again, a very strong sensitivity pattern is increasing with age in our Maxi Nutrio-based flocks, and being able to almost what I would describe in the field as holding in our Maxi Nutrio use flocks, but not full programs of repeated use, and then a growing resistance pattern in those non-Maxi Nutrio-based flocks. Aperlan or apomycin is a unique one. The graphs look a little bit different. We do see a lot of intermediate sensitivity, so that's for the yellows. So follow the yellows versus the reds. But again, watching that green being able to be exposed. Now it's an off-label product use with a long withdrawal. But again, what I'm looking for is in those first two sets of data is that the sensitivity is holding in and actually getting stronger than not being used in combination with Maxi Nutrio approach. And finally, our TMS or trimethylpyrin sulfa. This is a widely used antibiotic and an important one. This sulfa is readily relied on in terms of our broiler production in particular. So it has been holding in sensitivity. However, as we go through various challenges across the birds in terms of bacteria, and in particular early bacterial challenges, it's an important drug that we need to remain viable and sensitive over the years to come. So seeing the green on the page in our first two graphs here, documenting holding and improving in sensitivity with the use of Maxi Nutrio is very promising as a practitioner in Ontario poultry. So why does Maxi Nutrio work for us in our practice? Well, if we go back to our objectives of trying to optimize bird health and well-being, food safety, and profitability, we're able to check these boxes. We're able to support the birds against major disease stresses. We're able to protect the public against our zoonotic diseases, and ultimately by making healthier birds, we're making healthier profits. And why we turn to work with CBS bioplatforms as a whole, first and foremost, is we find a synergy with our values, our stewardship, our communication, excellence, and client service and integrity. We find this to be excellent technology and service provided by the CBS team. We're able to get help for our practice, and the flocks perform to the best of their potential. And then we're documenting leading edge technology in terms of its ability to influence disease and trends across the birds in Ontario and Canada. And in being able to connect with other producers and veterinarians internationally, they were very excited to be able to see that there's potential across their systems too, especially when we're working with similar diseases and similar birds and breeds, despite the other challenges around them. I think this technology has a great fit overall for poultry across the world. We often talk about bacteria, or specifically E. coli, being one of the most significantly economically devastating diseases. It's so common that sometimes I think it gets overlooked. So if nothing else, it's a great place to start. That was our initial journey. And then we were able to expand our learning into overall gut health, direct and indirect, and now immune support. And finally, watching this be a leader in terms of stewardship around antimicrobial sensitivity. So we just couldn't be happier to be growing with CBS and the information and technology as it does as well. Thank you, everyone.
All right. Thank you so much, Doc Jess. I'm going to hit pause here on this recording now.